So you're here because you want to better understand this idea of like covert contracts in marriage.
Yeah.
Right? Like what are the dynamics and how did we get to a place where marriage is so different from what maybe we expected or what we were told growing up? And that's exactly what we're diving into today with The Last Stand of Marriage, a man's guide to reclaiming his role in the family.
That's right.
It's a pretty bold title.
Yeah, it is.
And it promises to be like this roadmap for men who are looking to, well, as it says, reclaim their role in the family.
Absolutely. And one of the things that it starts with is taking us back in time to understand, the history of marriage.
Okay.
And what's really fascinating is that marriage wasn't always about love and romance.
I was really surprised by that too.
Yeah.
When you start to actually look at it historically,
Right.
it was so different.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, like, have we lost something important along the way?
Yeah, for sure. And, the book gives some good examples of that, like in ancient Greece and Rome, marriage was primarily about property and power. Women were considered possessions.
Wow.
Under Roman law, patria potestas.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, the power of the father.
Right.
And, marriages were often arranged, for political alliances or to have children.
Produce heirs.
Yeah, to produce heirs, exactly. Love wasn't really part of the equation.
So it's almost like this whole romantic ideal of marriage that we have now is a fairly recent invention.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the book makes the argument that understanding this historical, basis of marriage is crucial for navigating, the complexities of modern marriage.
Okay.
We can't just assume that the way things are now is the way they've always been.
That's a really good point. So when did things start to change? When did marriage become more about love and romance?
Points to the Industrial Revolution as a big turning point.
Okay.
With men leaving the home and becoming wage earners, working long hours in factories, it created a vacuum in the family structure. So women, they kind of by default took on more responsibility for the household and the, emotional well-being of the family.
So that's when women started seeking more emotional fulfillment within the marriage.
Exactly.
It's interesting how those economic shifts had such a big impact on our relationship.
Absolutely. And, the book argues that this shift combined with the rise of feminism has led to some unintended consequences. For men especially.
Yeah. Let's talk about feminism because the book dives into that.
Yeah.
And it does it in a way that I think is pretty nuanced.
Yeah.
It doesn't shy away from discussing the good things about feminism.
Yeah.
But it also is trying to look at what are some of the unintended consequences, especially for men. So what does it say about the different phases of feminism?
Yeah, so it outlines, the different waves of feminism, right? The first wave focused primarily on women's suffrage.
The right to vote.
The right to vote, exactly.
Yeah.
The second wave kind of broadened its scope to things like reproductive rights, workplace equality, sexual liberation.
Okay.
And then the third wave emphasized diversity. Functionality, exactly. So it's acknowledging the positive aspects of, those movements.
Right.
But it argues that while they were aiming for equality, it also led to some changes in the dynamics between men and women.
Right, especially within marriage.
That's right.
Yeah, what are some of the examples that it gives?
Well, it highlights how divorce rates increased.
Okay.
And oftentimes women were the ones initiating those divorces.
Interesting.
It also talks about how men started to feel increasingly alienated within their families and having difficulties connecting with their children who might be growing up influenced by feminist ideologies.
So is it saying that these changes, while intended to create equality, actually might have unintentionally shifted the balance of power in relationships?
Yeah, that's a key point. And it uses this interesting philosophical framework called the Hegelian dialectic to kind of explain these shifts.
All right, I gotta admit, Hegelian dialectic sounds a little intimidating.
You know, right?
Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, so it's actually a pretty simple concept. The idea that societal change happens through this process of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So the thesis is the established idea.
Okay.
The antithesis is the challenge.
Got it.
That idea. And the synthesis is the new idea that kind of emerges from that.
From that clash.
Yeah, from that conflict between the two.
So how does that apply to marriage?
Well, the book argues that traditional marriage, where men were the providers and women were the homemakers, that was the thesis.
Okay.
Feminism, with its critique of those traditional gender roles, was the antithesis.
Okay.
And then modern marriage, with its emphasis on, equality.
Shared responsibility.
Shared responsibilities is the synthesis.
The new idea.
The new idea, exactly.
Okay.
But the book is asking, has this synthesis truly achieved equality, or has it unintentionally disadvantaged men in certain ways?
That's a really interesting way to look at it. So it's not that the book is like anti-feminist, but it's asking us to consider the unintended consequences and how those have played out.
Yeah, okay. And this kind of leads to the concept of gynocentrism, which is a big focus in the book. And it defines gynocentrism as, a society that prioritizes women's needs and perspectives, often at the expense of men.
So it's arguing that this shift towards gynocentrism, while being presented as progress, may have actually led to the marginalization of men.
That's right.
In many areas of life.
That's right.
And what kind of effect does that have on men?
Well, it has a significant psychological impact.
Okay.
It can lead to feelings of emasculation, enticement.
It's interesting because we're not just talking about ideas now.
Right.
We're talking about how these societal shifts are impacting men's lives, their relationship, their self-worth.
It's real.
Yeah.
And the book also gets into the negative effects on men's mental health.
Okay, like what?
It discusses things like the increased rates of depression, anxiety, and even suicide among men.
Yeah, it's a pretty stark picture that it paints.
Yeah, it's a wake-up call that these shifts have real consequences.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So if modern marriage is supposed to be this egalitarian partnership, why are so many men feeling left behind?
Well, the book argues that modern marriage has become this simulacrum of its former self.
What do you mean by simulacrum?
Well, think of it like a movie set facade.
Okay.
It looks like a real building from the outside, but there's nothing behind it.
There's no substance.
There's no substance. Yeah. The book argues that modern marriage often lacks that clarity of roles and expectations that existed in the past, and that leaves men feeling uncertain and adrift.
It's like the rules of the game have changed.
Exactly.
But no one bothered to tell the players.
Right, and that leads to a lot of confusion and frustration and resentment.
Okay, so the book is saying that men need to understand these historical and societal shifts to better navigate modern marriage.
Absolutely.
Claim their sense of purpose and their place within their family.
That's a key takeaway.
Yeah.
So it's about taking responsibility, not just for your own life, but
for the future of marriage and family as a whole.
Yeah. The book is like a call to action, urging men to understand the forces at play and to take an active role in shaping their own destinies.
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part.
Yeah, we have.
Of our deep dive.
Yeah.
Going from the historical roots of marriage to the rise of feminism and this whole concept of gynocentrism. It's a lot to take in.
It is, yeah.
But it's important to understand this stuff if we really want to address these challenges that men are facing in modern marriage.
Yeah.
So we're going to continue this conversation in the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah, that's right.
And we're going to get into some even more thought-provoking concepts from the book.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. So we've been talking about how the historical evolution of marriage and this rise of gynocentrism has impacted men's roles in the family. But now let's look at how these shifts have kind of played out in the legal and social landscape.
Yeah, the book really doesn't hold back.
No, it does.
When it comes to examining the legal aspects of marriage and divorce, it argues that the system often puts men at a disadvantage. Especially when it comes to things like child custody and financial settlement.
Yeah, and it gives some pretty stark examples.
Yeah, like what?
Well, for one, it highlights how men are more likely to lose custody of their children in divorce proceedings, even when they're, loving and capable fathers.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be...
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah, to be separated from your children because of a system that seems biased against you.
It's tough. And it's not just custody battle. No. Yeah. The book also talks about the financial burdens that are placed on men after divorce.
Things like alimony and child support.
Right, alimony and child support.
Yeah, which can be really substantial and long-lasting.
So it paints this picture of a system that seems stacked against men, making it harder for them to rebuild their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And, speaking of rebuilding your life and these challenges that men face, have you ever felt like societal expectations make it harder for you to express your emotions or to seek help when you're struggling?
That's a great question. And it kind of ties into something else that the book talks about, which is this suppression of men's emotion.
Right.
Society often expects men to be stoic.
Yeah, to be strong. To not show their feelings.
Right. It's like there's this unspoken rule that men aren't supposed to have feelings.
Right.
Or at least they're not supposed to show them.
Don't be weak.
Yeah, and that can have serious consequences for men's mental health.
Absolutely. Bottling up your emotions.
Yeah.
It can lead to anger, resentment, depression, all sorts of problems.
And it can also lead to problems in relationships.
Right, absolutely.
If men aren't able to express their needs and feelings openly.
It creates misunderstanding, resentment.
Yeah, and it just makes it harder to connect.
Right.
This reminds me of something else that the book brings up.
Okay.
Which is this concept of performance masculinity.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, the book argues that men are constantly under pressure to perform.
To be successful.
To be successful.
To be the provider.
To be strong.
To be strong.
And that pressure can be overwhelming.
It can be, yeah.
For a lot of guys.
And, it leaves very little room for men to just be themselves.
Right, with all their flaws and imperfections. The book also delves into this whole impact of progressive ideologies on men's roles in society.
Yeah, this is a big one.
It's a controversial topic.
It is.
But I think it's an important one to discuss.
For sure.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the book argues that, ideologies like Marxism and queer theory, while often presented as promoting equality, have in some ways undermined traditional gender roles and created this kind of confusion about what it means to be a man.
So it's not that the book is against these ideologies, but it's raising questions about how they have impacted men's sense of identity and purpose.
Exactly. It's like they've changed the rules of the game, but haven't really explained the new rules to anybody.
And one specific example the book talks about is this concept of toxic masculinity.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one these days.
What are your thoughts on that term?
Well, the book argues that that term is often used too broadly.
Okay.
It kind of paints all expressions of traditional masculinity as being negative and harmful.
It's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Exactly. There are certainly negative aspects to masculinity.
Of course.
But the book is saying, hey, there are also positive aspects that are important to recognize and preserve.
What?
Well, things like strength, courage, assertiveness, a sense of responsibility.
Right.
These are all positive aspects of masculinity that are essential for a healthy society.
And this kind of connects to what the book talks about with the importance of men's spaces.
Exactly.
The book argues that men need spaces.
They do.
Where they can connect with other men, share their experience, celebrate their masculinity without fear of judgment.
It's like society is increasingly telling men that their way of being is inherently wrong.
Right.
And so these spaces can provide a sense of belonging and camaraderie.
And support.
Exactly.
The book also discusses the rise of the manosphere and the men's rights movement.
What are your insights on that?
Well, the book acknowledges that these movements have emerged as a response to the challenges that men are facing
to the struggle
in this rapidly changing world. It sees them as a reflection of this growing frustration and disillusionment that a lot of men are feeling.
It's like men are finally starting to speak up and say, hey, we're struggling here too.
Yeah, our voices deserve to be heard.
Exactly. And they're bringing attention to issues.
Like what?
Like the bias against men in family courts.
Okay.
The high rates of male suicide. The societal pressures that men face.
Yeah, the book seems to approach these movements with a sense of understanding.
It does.
It's not dismissing them as just a bunch of angry men.
It recognizes the legitimate concerns that they raise.
Right, it's saying that these movements are a sign that something needs to change.
Absolutely.
That men's needs and experiences are not being adequately addressed.
Yeah, it's a wake-up call.
By society.
For sure.
Okay, so we've been really digging into these challenges that men are facing in modern society.
Yeah.
And it seems like the book is saying that a lot of these challenges come from this shift away from traditional values.
Yeah. Traditional roles.
And roles, right? And it seems to advocate for a return to some of those traditional values, like clear roles and expectations within marriage.
Yeah, it argues that traditional marriage, with its emphasis on the man as like the provider and protector, and the woman as the nurturer and homemaker, that that framework offered stability and purpose for both men and women.
I mean, that doesn't seem a little outdated though in today's world.
The book does acknowledge that times have changed, and it's not advocating for a complete return to the past, but it's suggesting that there are valuable lessons that we can learn from traditional models, even as we adapt them to modern life.
So it's not about going back to the 1950s, but it's saying maybe there are some aspects of traditional marriage that still have relevance today.
Exactly. Like, for example, it emphasizes the importance of men embracing their role as protectors and providers, not in a domineering or controlling way, but in a way that provides security and stability for their family.
Yeah, and I can see how that would be appealing to a lot of men who are feeling like their role has become increasingly unclear and maybe even undervalued
for sure
in modern society.
And it also encourages men to be more assertive and confident in their relationships, to set clear boundaries, to communicate their needs effectively.
So it's about men taking ownership of their lives and their relationships.
Taking responsibility, not being passive.
Yeah,
exactly.
The book also talks about the importance of men connecting with their masculinity in a healthy
way
and balanced way.
Right.
So what does that mean?
Well, it argues that men need to reclaim the positive aspects of masculinity.
Like what?
Strength, courage, leadership, but without resorting to, aggression or dominance.
Right. So it's about finding that balance between being assertive but also being compassionate, between being a leader but also being a team player.
Exactly. It's about developing your emotional intelligence. Being in touch with your feelings and expressing them in healthy ways.
So the book gives a lot of advice for men who are struggling in their marriages.
It does.
What are some of the key takeaways?
Well, one of the most important things is communication. Being able to communicate openly and honestly with your partner.
So that means being able to share your feelings, your needs, your concerns.
And your fear.
Without fear of judgment or rejection.
Exactly.
It sounds like the book is really emphasizing the importance of vulnerability in relationships.
It is, It argues that true intimacy requires both partners to be able to let down their guard and be their authentic selves.
It also suggests that men need to be more proactive in meeting their partner's needs. So what does that look like practically?
Well, it encourages men to be more thoughtful, more romantic in their relationship.
So it's about showing your partner that they are loved, valued, and appreciated.
And it's about putting in the effort, the work to create that strong and fulfilling partnership.
The book also talks about divorce.
Yeah, it doesn't shy away from that.
Which is a tough topic.
It is.
What does it say about that?
Well, it acknowledges that divorce is sometimes the best option, but it encourages men to explore all other avenues before making that decision.
So like what?
Things like counseling, communicating openly, working to resolve issues.
Before throwing in the towel.
Before resorting to divorce.
Right. It's about recognizing that marriage is a commitment and it takes work.
It does.
To make it work. Sometimes a lot of work.
The book also offers guidance for men who are going through a divorce. It does. What kind of guidance? Well, it helps them to navigate the legal system to protect their rights and to maintain a relationship with their children.
That's so important.
It is. Yeah. And it's about empowering men
to
make informed decisions during a really difficult time.
Yeah, because divorce can be so emotional.
It can be,
And the book wraps up with this call to action.
It does.
For men to step up and become leaders.
Leaders in their families, in their communities, and in society as a whole.
So it's recognizing that men have unique strengths and qualities.
Absolutely.
That they can bring to the table to create a better world.
For everyone.
For everyone.
Yeah.
So this book, The Last Stand of Marriage, it's a powerful book.
It is.
It's thought-provoking.
It really makes you think.
It challenges men to reevaluate their roles and responsibilities in this changing world.
For sure.
And it offers insights and advice.
Practical advice.
Practical advice.
Yeah.
For men who are committed to building strong and fulfilling relationships.
Yeah, for themselves and for their families.
It's a book that's going to make you think. It's going to make you question. Might even make you angry at times.
Might.
But ultimately, I think it offers hope and a path forward.
Yeah, I think so too.
For men who are seeking to, reclaim their power and create a better future.
Absolutely.
So if you're interested in learning more about this book, you can find The Last Stand of Marriage, A Man's Guide to Reclaiming His Role in the Family.
That's a mouthful.
On Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
Yeah, check it out.
Well, that's it for this deep dive.
Yeah.
We hope you found it insightful.
I hope so.
And thought-provoking.
Yeah, and remember, the future is what we make it.
And it's up to each of us
Yeah.
to take responsibility for creating a world where men and women can thrive together
Absolutely.
in healthy and fulfilling relationships.